So we're going to dive in first of all and talk about, the prize of the draft last year. He was the number one overall guy on a lot of guys' boards. He was number two overall on mine, in full disclosure. I had Will Anderson ahead of Jalen Carter on my big board, but Jalen Carter falls to number 9. The Eagles trade up and select him in the draft, and he comes in and has a pretty good rookie season. I'll throw out some stats, and then we're going to kick it over to Nick and Eric and let them talk a little bit about what they saw. But Jalen Carter in 2023, I've got it here on the screen. You can go search my tweets if you are listening on an audio platform and you want to see this visually. But out of qualifying interior defensive linemen, which was a minimum 350 snaps, 95 guys qualified. And all these stats are from Sports Info Solutions. He had 534 snaps, which ranked 43rd. He ranked 56th in tackles, so lower volume there overall, but then you get into his pass rushing, which was really the bread and butter. He had 382 pass rush snaps, 6 sacks. He had a 1.7% sack rate that ranked 17th among interior linemen. He had 39 pressures with an 11% pressure rate, and that ranked 12th. And then he was lower on run defense, 152 run defense snaps. Per PFF, he ranked 5th in overall defense grade, 12th in run defense grade, and 8th in pass rush grade. And so Jalen Carter really came out of the gate hot last season, and I think people were really excited. You see those first few games and the way he was just dominating. And as the season went on, the season spiraled out of control, starting with that 49ers loss. And Jalen Carter saw his pressures per game drop from 3.7 over the first part of the season to 1.8. And I think it's worth noting he played over 400, or he never played over 400 defensive snaps at Georgia in a season. And that San Francisco game marked when he went over 400 snaps. But I do think it's too simple to just call it a rookie wall. I think there's more that went into that. I don't think we should necessarily just expect him to take a leap automatically. Nick, you did a great video during the season breaking down some of Carter's struggles down the stretch as he started to slow down. What did you see on the film over the back half of the season, and where do you see that room for improvement for him in year 2?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was circumstantial. All right, so the beginning of the season, if you go back and look at the teams that they were playing and the health of those teams at that point in time of the year, they were playing a ton of backup or rookie players all the way up through really the Cowboys game in week 9. I mean, you can go back to even the first game of the season against the Patriots. They were down their first 2 guards. So he was going against 3rd and 4th string players at that point in time. We should expect a player like Carter to kind of dominate in those scenarios, and he did. So that's great to see. Once you got towards, like I said, week 9 against the Cowboys, and then you start to come back from the bye and play the Chiefs, and then they played the Bills, playing the 49ers. Those snap counts rose, but also the players that he was going against were a lot better too. The Cowboys have 2 all-pro guards. I mean, you're just not going to keep up the same level of play against those guys. Now, he still was wrecking shop on some plays, and there was a play against the Cowboys where he got a sack against Tyler Smith off of a nice double swipe move. That's not easy to do against an all-pro caliber player. So those are things that you really like to see. They play the Chiefs, who I think have the best trio of interior players from their guard, center guard, especially now that Jason Kelce is retired. They had 2 all-pros at center and 1 at guard, and then another Pro Bowl level player at their other guard position. So listen, they just started playing better teams at that point in time, so I'm not that surprised that his numbers took a bit of a hit. But at the end of the day, once you start putting more of your tendencies on tape, you start to see other teams are able to game plan for you a little bit better. Some things that I noticed specifically with Carter's, and I started noticing this around week 4 against the Commanders, is he comes out of his stance so low, but a lot of times he has his head so far over his skis that teams are using what's called a snatch technique, where they kind of just pop their feet back and throw you to the ground. I have a clip of that I sent to you, Shane. That's a good example for people to see, but that really showed up the rest of the year, and it's just one of those tendencies where he's going to have to work on his body positioning as he goes into next year. There's also other little things, like there's times where his hands would just be very wide. He'd let people get into his chest. Some of those things show up the more you put him on tape, and we expect him to get better at that as he progresses throughout his career. But even still, he was one of the most dominant players at his position, especially as a rookie. I mean, if you just go back, I'll add some of the numbers you discussed. If we look at the top 100 rookies in snaps since 2019 among interior defensive linemen, his pass rush win rate was first. His pressure rate was third. What I like to look at is a thing called their real pressure rate. That's what I call it. If you have access to PFF Ultimate, which is really what the teams have, it's not really available for the public. They break their pressure numbers into different categories, so you can include unblocked pressures and cleanup pressures. And Shane, I sent you a graphic of Jalen Carter's stats, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about there. But if you take out all of his unblocked pressures and his cleanup pressures, his real pressure rate was first. So this brings me to the Dolphins now. Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer had their best seasons of their careers with under Fangio. They had the most unblocked pressures among any team last year, among the interior defensive line. They had Wilkins had 20 unblocked pressures, Sealer had 14 on his own. Jalen Carter had 1. So if you look at the real pressure rates of Wilkins and Sealer versus Carter, Carter was at 11.8%, Sealer was at 4.5%, and Wilkins was at 5.2%. So what is the ceiling for Carter going into next year when Vic Fangio is going to help scheme up some more open and unblocked pressures and make life easier for Jalen Carter? He got 6 sacks on his own. Wilkins went from a career high 4.5 sacks to 9 sacks just with Fangio. What is Jalen Carter going to get to when he's getting 20 unblocked pressures a season, or potentially getting to that point in time? So I'm super excited for Carter. I personally, at one point in time, he was plus 7,500 to win Defensive Player of the Year, same as Josh Sweat and Jalen Phillips, who is coming off of a torn Achilles. I thought that was crazy. Now, I'm not saying he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but listen, I thought that was wildly mispriced. If he gets to a 10-sack range, which is where Sealer and Wilkins got last year, and the Eagles are, one of the better teams in the league, he's going to be talked about as one of the defensive players of the year. So I'm super excited for him, and I don't want to take up all the time. I'd like to hear what you guys think about him as well.
Yeah, Eric, is there anything you wanted to add in on that? Just your general impressions of Jalen Carter in his rookie season and kind of what you expect from him under Fangio in year 2?
Yeah, Nick really said it all. I think that was a great recap. The only thing I'd add is I think you said he played roughly 580 snaps or something like that. Now, if you look at how Fangio likes to lean on his best defensive players, that number might shoot up into the 800s. And this is always the question, which is, does their performance scale with that increase in volume? Now, one of the things about Carter is he looked great in his rookie year. You look at the best defensive tackles around the NFL, they don't generally hit their stride to like year 3 or 4. So he's way ahead of the curve. So, maybe he loses a little bit of juice in the pass rush situations, because if you put his splits up there, he was kind of biasing his snaps towards more passing downs. But like Nick mentioned, with all of those schemed unblocked pressures, with those little stunts that they run on the inside, that could do wonders for his production. So, when I scouted him, I was like, man, this guy's like the best defensive tackle I've ever watched. The only thing I overlooked in scouting him is that he didn't play that many snaps, despite being one of the best players in all of college. So you're always going to look a little bit better when you're always fresh with the Georgia rotation. And this is why Fangio kind of was harping on, let's make sure these guys are in great conditioning. That's going to be the difference maker, throughout the season.
You guys have both mentioned the way that Fangio schemes up some of these unblocked pressures. And Nick, you sent me a clip, and I want to let you guys walk our viewers through it. And then Jonny, I'll throw it to you too. But walk me through this rep against the Titans and how you think Vic Fangio could build a pass rush plan for Jalen Carter using similar ideas and stunts here.
Yeah, so let's go to the tight view so we can see the defensive linemen here. So what's going to happen a lot, and it happened a lot last year, is teams were really trying to put 2 bodies on Carter. And the same thing was happening with the Dolphins. A a lot of times, especially on third downs, they're going to try and slide their protection over to Wilkins if they can, as long as the Dolphins aren't presenting them a look where they need to slide their line to to a potential blitzer or something like that. But what the Dolphins were doing a lot were running this nose tackle pick stunt. It was essentially a read stunt. So what happens is the center is going to work with the guard towards Wilkins. And when they read that, both of those defensive tackles are reading the center. And so if the center steps towards you, essentially as a defensive tackle, you know you're going to loop around and your buddy is going to come and pretty much blindside pick the center. And it really puts a lot of stress between the opposite center and the center and the opposite guard to communicate and switch off that stunt really well. But it's just it's a difficult thing to pass off, especially if you're not expecting it. But it's going to be one of those automatic reads where if the line's sliding to Jalen Carter, well, he's getting a pick set for him to come around looping free. And the thing with these plays is you need certain types of body types or certain types of athletic profiles to run these stunts. If you ask Jordan Davis to be the guy that's looping a lot, he's not going to be as successful as Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter's movement skills for the position and his size are incredible. It's amazing. He moves like a guy that's 20 to 30 pounds lighter. You watch him and Milton Williams, and they're same type of movement styles, but he's just so much bigger and a better athlete. So you really need a certain type of player to run these stunts. Now, I like to add one more thing about this. Not only is this going to help open up, when Jalen Carter is getting double teamed, but one of the ways to really to offset the stunt is to have your center kind of get more depth in their pass drop. So when that does happen, that also makes it easier for when Jalen Carter is double teamed and they don't have this stunt called. It's easier to beat one guy if he's at one level versus your center being a little bit further back. You get to kind of work against one guy and then you can get to the next guy and start working against him. So it kind of builds off of each other. You're kind of forcing the center to get more depth in his pass drop because of that stunt that you're constantly running, which in turn helps you when you're not running that stunt and he's getting doubled anyways. It helps make Jalen Carter's life a little bit easier. And I think this is something that we're going to see a lot of. I really think last year their best pass rusher was Hassan Reddick, and they built a lot of their exotic pressures or their stunts around Reddick. Well, now that Reddick's gone, this really opens up a path for Carter to have the pass rush built around him, and I think it's going to take his game to the next level.
All right, so interesting stuff there. Some things that you could maybe see schematically from Vic Fangio moving forward. Jonny, you and I have talked about Jalen Carter a little bit more. Now, hold on just a second. Eric, did you have something you wanted to throw in there?
Just to add real quick, I think a lot of times you're going to see those stunts on more obvious passing downs because it can screw up your run fits. And one of the things we talked about is who is the best pass rush partner on third downs with Carter. And I actually think that play you just showed there, it would be great to pair Brandon Graham with him because he does have the ability to pass rush, but also has like the pop in his hands where he can drive the center sideways and open up room for Carter. So.
All right. And let's also jump. I sent you a clip of Sealer running the stunt too, because this play not only helps Wilkins, it was mainly run for Wilkins, but it also can help free up the guy setting the pick if you don't switch it off right. So if we look at the tight view on this play, again, we're going to see the same thing. The line is going to slide, the center is going to slide and work towards Wilkins. But watch what happens on this exchange. Sealer comes free, and that's why Sealer had 14 unblocked pressures last season, is just because of this play. Now, sometimes the pick does get set for, because it's a read stunt, the pick does get set for Sealer, but more often than not, the line was sliding to Wilkins. So it was Wilkins that was the one that benefited specifically, but you can also benefit in an indirect way if you are the guy setting the pick. And I think, like you mentioned, Brandon Graham's a good guy that could do that. I think Milton Williams could also fit in well with his athletic style, his profile, to be able to run those stunts as well. And you got to be a good teammate to run this stunt. You can't be selfish doing that.
Yeah, that's one thing that we'll never have to worry about with Brandon Graham. So I would love to see Brandon Graham go out on another one of those double-digit sack years. I was so happy for him when he finally got over the hump and got the double digits a couple years ago. I doubt that's going to happen, but I'd love to see Graham, hitting the quarterback a few times over this next season. Jonny, you and I have spoken about Jalen Carter on and off the air. But from the things Nick and Eric are talking about, what have you seen that we haven't mentioned so far? Do you agree or disagree with kind of their stuff? I guess I'll give you the floor here to talk a little bit about Carter and your thoughts on him moving forward.
Yeah, to be honest, you can't really disagree, can you, with loving Jalen Carter? I'm a little bit similar to Eric, so I didn't watch Carter that much pre-draft because I just assumed the Eagles had no chance of getting him. And then I kicked myself when they drafted him. So I went back and watched him mainly after they drafted him, and I've done this for a while, and he was the second best defensive tackle I ever scouted, the best being Aaron Donald. Like, Aaron Donald was always my favorite player in that draft class because he jumped off the screen. I think people forget, Carter weighed in about 313 or something at the combine. Like, he's a big guy. I think at his pro day, there was talks about his weight going up as well, if I remember last offseason. I'm sure he was about 320 by his pro day. Yeah, if you watch him, he wins with, like, gap-shifting quickness. Like, that's his game. Like, he jumps through gaps like a guy who weighs 290. And to be that quick at 310, 320, however big he is, like, just as an overall player, Nick mentioned this, and I don't really talk in, like, hyperbole too much, but I think he could be the best defensive player in a couple of years. Like, I do think he has that level of potential. He's the only current Eagles defensive player who has that potential. There's not really anything he can't do. Like, he can anchor against double teams. He's big enough. His hand usage is really good. He hasn't just got one pass rush that he consistently goes to. His power to finish, like his burst in run defense as well. Like, he's pretty much a complete player as a rookie. Now, obviously, he's got a lot to learn because he's a rookie playing a very difficult position, and he's going to lose a few reps here and there. But in terms of like overall potential, like without sounding too like optimistic, it is as sky high as it can possibly be. I think for him, it's going to come down to off-the-field concerns and weight gain and conditioning, and can he handle, as Eric mentioned, the volume of stats from a pure like talent level. There's not really anything negative I can say. I think Nick showed a little bit more of the technical stuff of his rep where he falls forward as well, and I do wonder stuff like that, how much that comes down to concentration, focus in the meeting rooms, focus during the week, and again, that horrible work conditioning we mentioned a lot with Jordan Davis, because he's going to play a lot next year. But I don't really have anything else to add. Like, I do genuinely think out of all the Eagles players, I'm most confident on succeeding long term. He is number one by a mile, and I've sort of been in love with him as a player ever since I scouted him pre-draft, to be honest with you.
The biggest question I still have about Jalen Carter, and it was the biggest weakness I listed for him pre-draft, the biggest concern, other than the off-the-field stuff that, I'm just not in a position to know about, so can't speak on. But the biggest thing that I was concerned about with him coming out was that I thought he was overly reliant on like club moves. I wrote in my scouting report, overly reliant on inside club/swim moves, needs to develop more moves and refine his hand placement. And to me, looking at him and a lot of his reps, especially down the stretch, that's still what I think the biggest thing that he needs to do is he needs to build out that pass rush plan. He needs to get his hands need some work. He gets too wide. He's a little wild with his hands sometimes. So that's the biggest thing I would like to see improvement from him on over, his first full offseason in the NFL going into year 2. I'll throw it to each of you guys quickly before we move on. What's the biggest thing, the biggest leap, the biggest improvement you hope to see from him next season? Eric, I'll throw it over to you first.
I think it's what you mentioned. Over reliance on that like club move, I think that also is hand in hand with rush lane integrity, where you're always trying to work this move and then you'll end up like moving way out of your gap, and whether you're leaving room for the quarterback to step into that vacated space or actually scramble for yardage. This was a problem for the whole defensive line last year, where, people just use the buzzword freelancing, but, the way it actually unfolds is they're just desperately trying to like beat their guy rather than like collapse the pocket, and it works against each other. So I agree with you, if he gets a little bit more diverse pass rush repertoire, then he won't be moved out of the space as often.
All right, Nick, what about you? What's your biggest hope for improvement?
Yeah, that's Eric pretty much stole what I was going to say is rush lane integrity. He would have fell into a few more sacks if he just had better rush lane integrity. 2 of his sacks, his first sack ever, good rush lane integrity. The quarterback gets pushed into him and he just falls into a sack. One of his sacks against the Rams was very similar. There's actually 2 clips I wanted to show about exactly what you guys are talking about, and it kind of goes to your point, Shane, about what you were talking with his inside club move. There's a play against the 49ers against Brock Purdy where he just he throws his inside club, but here he is as lined up as a 3 tech over here. He continues to try and work that inside club again after it's already been caught, right? At a certain point in time, you need to convert to power, just collapse the pocket. If he had done that, Reddick would have forced Purdy up into his arms. He would have fell into a sack, or at least made this a much tougher play for Purdy overall. The next play I wanted to look at is a play against the Dolphins. It was actually Nolan Smith's unblocked sack. And it was one of Vic Fangio's base plays that he likes to run. Desai ran this a few times last year as well. For people unfamiliar, Desai coached under Fangio for 4 seasons. So we again see Carter. Carter's supposed to be coming across the opposite face of the center right here, but he instead tries to club back outside for some reason, and he clubs into the path of where the blitz is coming. Now, luckily, the line slid the other way, so Nolan Smith came unblocked. But you can see if that didn't happen, he would have allowed a huge rush lane for the quarterback right there to step up into. It's little stuff like that, just being better with those little details, I think is just going to help improve his game and his numbers right there.
All right, Jonny, anything you want to add on to that? What's your biggest hope for Jordan Davis, for Jalen Carter taking that leap in year 2?
No, if I'm honest. The stuff that Nick mentioned in true podcast fashion of stealing each other, I was going to mention the rush lane integrity. But that was also not just a problem for Carter. And I sort of hinted at that when I said about it's going to be what he does in the meeting room and conditioning wise. I think that's the kind of thing I'm on about, like how serious does he take the game? Because body type wise, athletic profile wise, like it's there. So yeah, I'll leave it there before we go for 3 hours on Jalen Carter. But the film is extremely promising. So if anyone wondering, in summary, I think we all agree that the potential is absolutely sky high.
All right, yeah. Jonny, we need to get some guests on that don't watch the film so we can disagree with them every once in a while and stop stealing what each other's going to say, I guess. So